Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are around the world. Welcome to this first session of Keys for 2022. Our theme today is the year ahead, what else? And we're going to ask ourselves what is happening now and what will happen next. In some ways, I think for many of us, the beginning of the year seems like a little bit of back to the future, as we all deal with the uncertainties of the new COVID variant, as well as with new challenges such as supply chain problems and also the effects of inflation. There is also a lot of discussion about what the pandemic has changed for us, both concealing, revealing, or accelerating trends that may have already been out there but have been somewhat changed. So let's get started. On the agenda, we first have Simon in London, who will be with us as usual to update us on the public opinion. And this time, Simon is wondering whether this is the end of the beginning. So he will share with us a few key insights on what the COVID times have taught us, at least so far. Then we will have Oscar in New York, in From Adjusting to Living. Oscar will explore how this unpredictable world is challenging for businesses, but businesses can boost their agility and their responsiveness with shorter-term scenario-based planning. Natalie in Amsterdam will then focus on the affluent, a target which in different countries and contexts has been very resilient through the whole COVID period. And it is also a target that is likely to be setting the trends that we all will be following tomorrow. And at last, we are going on a guided tour of a fascinating country with Katya in Moscow. She will take us for a tour of Russia in the flow of change. And with that, I will pass over to Simon to open the webinar.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everybody, for being with us. Yes, it's 2 years since more than 100 countries went into lockdown at very, very short notice. 2 years later, we're not quite sure what, of course, will happen next. Many twists and turns to come, but perhaps we have reached the end of the beginning. And with that in mind, we've had a team put together at Ipsos to try to bring out some of the lessons that we've learned so far during COVID times. We've written an article so far, and we've also tried to distill it for this presentation in 10 numbers that in different ways tell the story of what people around the world have been through and hopefully help set the scene for today as we think about what may happen next. First up is about the adaptivity of human beings, which I think really has shone through if we start to take stock. We're 2 years in. It's January 2022. 43% of people around the world are still preparing or adjusting for new restrictions. But still, life went on, and still the economies around the world performed better than many people had feared. Second point, though, is around the pandemic and the toll it's taken on all of us, and everybody will have their own stories to tell. I'll talk a bit later about differences in countries around the world, but just for now, I think we focus on this 79% of people around the world who now say that their mental health is as important as their physical health. And there's a real consensus across country, and there's a real conversation or sets of conversations that are going to happen as we come through the next stage of the crisis. Our third point is around unpredictability. And Oscar will pick up on this in a moment. So for now, we just reflect on 3 points in time, or indeed 3 webinars in time. When we started this series in March 2020, we were talking about stockpiling, something new we weren't expecting. In June last year, we were reflecting on those new routines as we work, shop, and try to relax at home. Today, as we start this year, we're thinking about inflation, about prices. 20% are worrying about costs. It's double January last year. It's the highest we've ever seen. Fourth thing is around the gaps, the sense that the pandemic has reminded us of some of the old problems that we were already facing and added some new ones. And one of the things we focus on is around the rather large group of people now who were born since the 1980s. The millennials, for example, 37% of them are saying that their parents had better life chances than they have now. Many of them, of course, are still living with their parents. And it's a real marker for us to think about in terms of what that might mean in terms of people's expectations, an expectations gap, perhaps, a loss of the future. Many ways we can think about this issue, but it's certainly something we need to watch. Another thing we were watching when the pandemic started was a pandemic baby boom, but it hasn't happened, at least certainly not so far. Indeed, many countries, India and China, perhaps being the most important of all, given their populations, now have birth rates that are below their replacement rates. And the likelihood now is we're going to have to be preparing even more for a world population which is going to be starting to decline sooner than we thought. Raises questions around whether governments are prepared. It raises questions of whether brands are prepared in terms of how they communicate and market to an older audience. And it raises questions for our own profession here of market research. Many of our surveys still have a cutoff point of over 65 or over 70 being where we stop or stopped interviewing people. So big questions there around populations. Big questions also around making sure that we are understanding countries, cultures, and different dynamics. Time and time again, we're seeing big disparities in outlook, even by apparently close neighbours, geographically or culturally, or by religion, or by type of economy. And to illustrate, we've got our new What Worries the World survey. So yes, on one level, the headline is that coronavirus remains the #1 issue around the world. But once we look at the individual countries, we find 7 different themes that are #1 when we look across those 28 nations that we've studied. And it really, again, reminds us that we have to always think, I guess, in an agile way, beyond the global country average sometimes, and think about those prevailing cultures, legal systems, what governments are doing. This has been the year when we found doctors overtaking scientists as the world's most trusted profession. It's been a year where we found that behaving responsibly was at the heart of people's considerations when we were looking at what drives trust in public and private institutions. And it's been, perhaps in light of that, the year where we find pharmaceutical companies, banks, and indeed governments scoring a bit higher in the trustworthiness stakes, and perhaps some reflections and some positive benefits that they're getting from the role that they played during the pandemic. And just to stay with governments for the moment, of course, we may not like our government, we may have concerns about what it's doing, but in this time of crisis, it's been to governments that we have often turned in terms of who we feel needs to take the lead and take responsibility for getting us out of this problem. And this question about how our expectations of the state will evolve in the coming period, of course, very, very fluid, but really feels like one we need to watch and understand better. Another thing to watch, which still feels very fluid, is this sense of being out of equilibrium. And we're certainly finding that, again, being in the early part of this year, still we've got 80% of people expecting another wave of COVID infections in my country. In many countries, people are saying things are out of control right now. And we see these questions around fear and risk and uncertainty when we look at individuals on the ground. Musa from Nigeria talking about the fear of the unknown and reflecting on what I buy and staying prudent. Or Michael in the US talking about the importance of keeping his immune system as strong as possible as part of his daily regime. And finally, the sustainable future. Certainly, we didn't find concerns about the environment evaporating during COVID times. People remain very clear that we need to make changes as a planet, and we say that we as people understand the action that we need to take to play our role in tackling climate change. Of course, the question is whether we're really on top of those actions and the actions that will make the biggest difference. For the moment, we often feel that recycling is at the heart of what we need to be doing. But certainly any look at the external data suggests that it's actually taking a good hard look at what we buy, what we consume, and how we travel around our neighborhood, our country, or indeed the world may make that bigger difference. So certainly leadership, whether it's from us, from brands and organizations, or from governments, has to be at the front if we're thinking about where the sustainable future may be coming from. So just to sum up, we've put all of this together in an article that we prepared for the Davos agenda. We've got a report coming in February to take this forward, and there'll be more that we need to do in these webinars actually to pick up on these topics. But for now, I've left in the deck that we'll be sharing with you after the webinar some of the different resources that we've drawn on as we've reflected on the end of the beginning and started to think about what might happen next. So I hope that's been a useful scene setter, and I'll pass back to Jennifer now in the studio in Milan to take us forward. Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Simon. And yes, a special thanks for framing the context for us so nicely with all these very strong insights. I'm sure they stick and they make sense to all of us here on this call. And I guess it's only natural to then wonder, based on everything that you've just described, Simon, how are businesses supposed to cope with all this? And how can they prepare for a future with such a lot of uncertainty? So, Oscar, we're all very keen to hear from you, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Jennifer. Let me pull up my presentation here. Should be, maybe not. There we are. So thank you, Simon. Thank you, Jennifer. I think what the obvious question, as you said, Jennifer, from all the axes that are moving along that Simon says is, that Simon talked about is what do we as businesses need to do? And I think the theme here is really we need to move from constantly adjusting to living in a world where this unpredictability is going to be a given. And so, we as futurists and as people who look at the future, we're all secret historians. And so what we did first when COVID started is we said, well, let's keep track of all of this. And Ipsos does this extremely well, right? So we developed this continuum that says how consumers are going through COVID, how they're experiencing COVID. Of course, being Ipsos, we did a beautiful job of tracking how consumers around the world are experiencing each different phase of COVID. And this is from April 2020 all the way through May 2021. And it was quite steady, and you saw the world, as you said, gradually acclimating to this. But what we saw after May of 2021 was quite interesting. In fact, we saw a complete then upheaval of all of the things as additional waves came in, as some countries opened and others didn't. And in fact, what we realized is that all the data that we were collecting is very interesting, but in fact not predictive at all, right? And so anytime someone asks you what's next or how do we prepare for the future, we can only say, I can't tell you exactly. I can tell you what the data up to this point has said, but going forward, the data is good reference, it's interesting, but I would not use it to predict the future. In fact, here in the US, for example, one thing we are constantly doing is predicting the 10-year treasury rates. And this is a fun example of how even the Fed of the US does it, right? So they take the previous 5 years and average the performance of the 5 years and say, okay, well, this is how it's going to look going forward. Of course, they're wrong. So 5 years later, they take the past 5 years again, they average it again, and then of course they're wrong again, right? And so the learning here is really the backwards looking view is not always going to be helpful. In fact, anytime someone asks you to make a prediction, if I were you, I would suggest you say, perhaps not. Predictions only set you up to be wrong. In fact, a smarter way to approach it is really, how do I take the data that I have and craft a story of what could happen? And this is the basis of what we call scenario planning and what we're working with a lot of clients here at Ipsos on. And we start with scenario planning because there are so many moving things. You want to put a couple things in solid places so that you can work with them, right? So there are a couple things that we know. There are a couple things that are certain. This is what we at Ipsos believe are some of the certainties, our known knowns, right? We know the climate will continue to evolve. We know technology will continue to dominate. We know there's going to be the development of some sort of axes of our systems and our institutions are going to evolve as well. We know the people, mental health, social conflict, rising education. We know all of these are known knowns that will continue into the years ahead. But there are many things we don't know, right? And I think the idea of this is really thinking about the things we know and the things we don't know and how we work within that context. The economy is one realm in which we are often unsure, right? There's signals that saying, listen, we will probably have a strong economy. We're getting vaccinated. We are opening up the supply chains again. GDP growth, every country tends to project positively. On the flip side, there are signals that are warning signals for us. Perhaps the economy will not be strong. We're leaving many of our lower income citizens behind. We see high inflation. We're seeing signals from China that perhaps 2022 will not be as strong as they have been in the past. At the same time, another thing we don't know is where demography, politics, and values will shift. There's a kind of a battle between traditional, nostalgic, and more progressive. Many of the traditional areas are looking at, COVID-19 has set back gender equality in many countries. There are many countries that have voted for more nationalistic, isolationist movements, while at the same time, we're looking socially progressive movements are happening, right? Whether it's around social equality, whether that's the emergence of new institutions like cryptocurrencies, there's things pushing us forward. So how we think about it is if we were to put, the social axis against the economic axis, and you'll start to see scenarios what would happen if these two things collided in this way, right? And this, I won't go into detail. This was work done last year in our Shaping 2025 work, which projects the world into 2025. But the scenarios themselves are true, but they're important insofar as the scenarios help us serve as a way to think about the future, right? So how do we use these scenarios? They serve as a foundation to think about the future uncertainty in a structured way, right? So we think about, okay, what is the most likely, what is second most likely, what is third likely? So rather than thinking about one solid future predicting, perhaps the smarter way to think about it is what are the potential scenarios that could occur? And this means a big change for organizations, right? So if most of you sit in large organizations that do annual planning, this is what your planning process likely looks like. Start with some data gathering, you do a strategic vision setting, you align that and socialize that within the organization, then you push it down to your brands, your divisions, your geographies, they develop their plans against that vision, and then you roll them back up again, and then we start monitoring and executing, right? This takes an enormous amount of time, enormous amount of effort every year, as I'm sure you're aware. But what we found in the past couple of years is that perhaps this is not the most effective way to go about planning. In fact, might it make more sense to say, well, let's spend some time gathering and then look at, using the scenario planning we just did, what are possible ways in which the world could evolve, right? It could be A, B, C, D, E, any number of ways. And let's develop a rough view as to what we would do in each of those scenarios. So rather than spending 90% of your time creating one scenario, let's spend a little bit of time on several potential scenarios, and then more time on monitoring, signal gathering, so that we're sensing where we're headed. And once we realize we're headed in a certain direction, then we move all the resources behind that one scenario. So what that looks like is we would be tracking all of these metrics, and let's say we're moving and we see we're moving to scenario C, well then we'll pull out what we had prepared for scenario C and then build that out more holistically and in a larger way. And so what that allows us to do is it allows us a lot more flexibility, especially as we look ahead to the year coming in 2022. We have some known knowns, right? Again, the things that we want to work around versus the things we don't know. If you think about 2020, I call it the year of novelty and adjusting. There was this interest in novelty and adjustment that was happening in 2020. 2021 was the year of waiting and coping. And we think 2022 is going to be the year of accepting and retooling, right? So we accept the fact that COVID is going to be with us, and it's time to retool all of our systems that we realized were too inflexible to adjust to the uncertainty that we see. So whether that's a global supply chain, challenges that we're seeing with the pricing and inflation, rethinking the workforce, I think is going to be really critical. Our workforce tends to be a little inflexible, and so what COVID-19 did was had a lot of the workers rethink what they want to do. And then, as Simon mentioned, refocusing on sustainability. I think that got put aside a little bit as we were masking up, throwing away billions of masks, using needles for vaccinations, all of which was necessary. Perhaps the sustainability fell in the priority of things, time to bring that back up, which is going to happen in 2022. So given these known knowns, given the unknowns, again, perhaps the right way to think about how we change our view in strategic planning is to move towards this scenario planning based way, which guarantees one thing, which is not that you're going to be right, because as we know about the future, it's never about being right, because chances are you will not be right. It is more about being prepared. So having the scenarios allows you to have a bit more flexibility and be prepared no matter what happens. All right, thank you. And Jennifer, back to you in Milan.
Thank you, Oscar. Great stuff, and I think great tips that everyone can think of when moving into this needed exercise of thinking about the future and planning for it. And I'm sure lots of the people on this call are in those processes within their own companies, their own businesses.
January, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As we are as well, right?
Yeah.
I was wondering if, thinking of that, you have any like specific tip that you would like to give to anyone on the call who's starting to try and go on this journey and think in the way that you were describing.
Yeah, I think the biggest shift that organizations need to go through is to move from more planning to more monitoring, right? So less planning, more monitoring. I think we tend to over-rotate towards this idea of we're going to have the whole year planned out, organized, because it gives us security. I feel good because I know exactly the plan that I'm going to execute on, right? In fact, you're going to feel worse when the plan you're going to execute on doesn't happen because something has changed. So I think the shift in mindset for large organizations is to move away from one, aligned, structured, inflexible approach to planning to be much more flexible, agile, willing to change, even if a bit imperfect, right? And I think that's a big mindset shift for organizations all over the world, including Ipsos. And I think it's a good mental and intellectual challenge and exercise to think about how we become much more flexible in this uncertain world.
Easier said than done, I guess, but it's about trying and getting down to it.
That's right.
Great, thank you so much, Oscar, for those for sharing those ideas and that point of view. And while doing the 2022 planning and beyond, I'm sure that many of the people on this call are also going to be thinking about different targets. And one of the targets that seems to be very relevant and interesting nowadays is the target of affluence. And Natalie, you have been working on this target and studying affluence for a very long time. So we're very keen to hear about, the lessons that you've learned, and especially looking at the last couple of years, what businesses should be thinking of when looking at this target. So over to you, Natalie, and keen to listen to what you have to say.
Thank you, Jennifer. Well, I'm Natalie, and I've been studying the global affluent for over 20 years now. And today I just want to share some insights into the affluent population, how they've been consuming media over these past 2 years, and how the affluent are ready to spend again, setting a trend for us to follow. So who are the affluent? How do we reach them, and why do they actually matter? Well, the Ipsos Global Affluence Surveys measured the habits of affluent consumers, but also top business decision makers. We do this in 49 markets, and they qualify based on household income, the top 20%. And we define the top 20% in all the individual markets. And because of their income, the affluent are typically known to be well-off, high net worth individuals, trendsetters of our society, and considered opinion leaders within their communities and working life. So who are the affluent? Let's have a look at Europe, the affluent in Europe. The average age is around 47. Over half of the affluent population speak at least one foreign language, while close to 80% have English either as a first or second language. Personal income averages around 58,000 euros, but as always, averages high variation. In Switzerland, it's around 98,000 euros, while in Poland, it's 23,000 euros. So Europe's affluent and influential have the money to buy big. They are educated, have opinions that other consumers listen to, They're early adopters, trendsetters, usually 12 months ahead of the curve, with the power to move markets. A very important target group for agencies and marketeers. So what do we know about the affluent? Well, based on the data collected over these last 2 years, I've identified 4 trends that make the affluent stand out the most. Well, to start off, I want to talk to you about the affluent's desire to be well informed and to stay up to date with what's going on in the world. A trend that we have seen in previous years as well, but accelerated during the pandemic. The affluent are actually hungry for information. They've always been interested in news and current affairs, and becoming better informed and gaining new knowledge is very important to them. But the desire to stay on top of things and to know what's happening around the world and to actually talk about these kind of topics is what sets the affluent and the business decision makers apart from the general population. But with technology on the rise, the affluent actually find ways to feed their hunger, new ways to feed their hunger, specifically through the use of audio sources. Well, audio as a source of media consumption has become increasingly more important for the affluent population. We've been measuring podcasts over these last 3 years, and this year we're reporting the biggest increase to date. And what are the top topics they listen to? News and current affairs, business, economics, and sports. And this actually suggests that podcasts are no longer just a source of entertainment, but also becoming a very important source of information for the affluent individuals. So the affluent, they continue to look for new ways to consume media and to use technology in their lives. They are known to adapt faster to new technology compared to the general population, and they actually love modern technology. Well, we actually see this in the increasing demand and ownership of wearable devices. The use of fitness trackers and smartwatches allow the affluent population to gather information about themselves, their activities, their health, and it allows them to receive push notifications about the most recent news events or any other topic that might interest them. We see similar numbers across the regions, with the US affluents being the front runners to own wearables. 30% of the Europeans intend to buy a wearable device, which is an estimate of 15.8 million across Europe. And the numbers are even higher in the Eastern markets, such as Poland and Russia and Turkey. There's actually an increase in ownership across all the devices over the past year. The 3 most popular devices at the moment are the digital media players, such as Apple TV, Google Chromecast, the voice speakers, such as Alexa, and the wearable devices, the fitness trackers and the smartwatches, all newest ways of consuming any type of media. Well, in Europe, we can also see some geographical differences in ownership of new technology, but also differences in intention to buy certain products. Here, I would like to highlight the popularity of the digital media players in the Nordic markets. On average, we see that about 25% of the total European affluent population own one of these devices. That's 1 in 4. But when we look at Norway and Sweden, we see that the numbers are even higher, around 60%, that's 6 out of 10. And when it comes to ownership of voice speakers, we see that countries for which this technology has been made available in the native language are adopting the fastest and the most to this technology. And another trend that we have seen or have been thinking about these last 2 years is obviously the growth of SVOD, the streaming services such as Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Hulu. It may come as no surprise that these numbers have gone up and increased over the last 12 months. Near enough half of the affluent population have been streaming on a daily basis. It's going to be very interesting to see if this trend will continue with all the new players in the market, but also now we're moving away from the COVID pandemic. Another trend that sets the affluent apart from the general population is the financial stability that they've experienced over the last 12 months. The affluent are quite confident about their financial future. 6 out of 10 feel financially secure, compared to 37% of the general population. The affluent don't mind paying extra for product for quality. 68% compared to 49% of the general population. And this actually explains why their spending never stopped, not even during the COVID period. When we compare 21 to 2020, we see an increase in spend among all luxury categories, such as designer clothing, jewelry, and luxury watches, except for a small decrease in cosmetics. And this actually confirms the idea that the affluent are ready to live their lives again and to pick up where they left off. But I don't want you to think that it's all about spending and luxury for the affluent. The affluent are also increasingly concerned about the environment and are aware of the importance of sustainability, making conscious decisions when they are buying these luxury goods or any other product or service. We have a global perspective, and as you can see, the affluent in Europe seem to be a bit more sustainability minded compared to the US and Asia Pacific. But we have seen this number grow steadily over these last 3 years. So attitudes towards these topics are very important for the affluent, and it's important to know these attitudes when you're communicating or targeting the audience. So this was just a glimpse of the results from the Ipsos Global Affluence Surveys, which contain diverse, valuable insights and preferences and attitudes about the affluent population. The affluent adapt earlier, spend more, recommend more often, and we feel that it's very important to know this audience and to keep engaging and understanding the audience of the affluent. So keep an eye on the affluent population. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Natalie. I'm sure lots of people will be keeping an eye on this group of people across the world. And you, as you said, you've been studying this group for many, many years, for decades. And so you have a great experience and a great point of view. And I was wondering if there's anything that you would point out in terms of something that surprised you, more recently over the last couple of years, anything that you saw in this sort of strange period?
Well, like I said at the beginning, we run this study in 49 markets, so in different regions. And what we actually see is that the global affluent come in different shapes and sizes with different wants and needs. But what they have in common is their above average spending power. And that's something we still see even over these last 24 months, that they kept on spending quite huge amounts as well. They're resilient, very optimistic, and still planning for the future, as in their next holiday in the next 12 months, and not just in a country close by, but even, outside of their own region. So they are very optimistic and a very strong target group. That's, yeah.
Great. So resilient and very much in a hurry to get back to moving around and to spending. That's definitely makes them a very interesting target. Thanks a lot, Natalie. And we're going to end our webinar today with a guided tour. And we have our guide here ready in Moscow. Katya is going to take us to understand a bit more about Russia, its culture, and what Russian people are like. So Katya, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. Hi from Moscow. In 2021, our clients often asked us not to describe the changes in consumption or behavior or purchase behavior, but also to characterize the social cultural profile of Russian people. Indeed, the value of this information during periods of change increases. Cultural attitudes influence how people react to changes and the speed of adaptation. As Simon mentioned in the first presentation, culture matters. We have decided to answer this question systematically and explore social cultural profile of Russians. And this research was a basis for our flair in 2022. So we are trying to describe 12 fundamental characteristics of collective image of Russian. We consider such stereotypes as unsmiling nation, unearned people, living beyond means, fatalism. We also explore our commitment to traditions, the need for a unifying great idea, straightforwardness, willingness to take risk, collectivism, heterogeneity of Russian culture, and saving. I will highlight some of these characteristics. Let's start with the first one. Savvy is a trait that is inherent in the Russian population. To look for a way out of any situation, to find new ways to solve problems. Yes, this is about us. Constant crisis, falling incomes, all this helps increase people's adaptability, while avoiding risk as much as possible. An example would be Miro Company, an online whiteboard for collaboration between teams. This platform was developed by a Russian team in Perm. The company was included in Enterprise Tech 30, the list of tech startups that have the greatest potential to make a tectonic change in how modern corporations work. Support and guarantees from big businesses or investors can maintain the development of entrepreneurial spirit in Russia. Non-passivity is a characteristic that clearly manifested in the social cultural profile. To make decisions independently, dance into your own beat, not to wait for the problem to be solved by itself, and to encourage initiatives. Maintaining initiatives in the company can bring fruitful results and improve your corporate culture. For services, if something does not work, you can expect users to find a solution by their own. Active position is more pronounced among women, demonstrated in a video prepared by a Russian TV channel for the New Year celebration. In this video, a woman shows a strong-willed character and copes with many tasks. The slogan of this video, "Sami Susami" in Russian, a person with mustache. That means that they can solve any problem successfully on their own. Russians are proud of the achievements and successes of the country. There are reasons for their pride: the development of advanced IT technologies and high level of digitalization. One example of digitalization is the massive use of online banking. Many services of social services or governmental services can be accessed online. Yandex is a technology company that builds intelligent products and services powered by machine learning. From the latest news, Yandex announced a launch of driverless taxis in Moscow. Continue on transportation topic, Moscow transport system can also be a reason for pride. In 2021, the Moscow transport system took the third place in the ranking of 25 leading megacities in the world. Being technology-oriented, Russians are committed to traditional values. Committed growth with age is more typical of people 45 years old population. Among young people, about a third do not follow traditional values. Many Russians love products that reference heritage. Russian folklore, Soviet cartoons, Russian scientists, writers, artists. For example, chocolate boxes designed with the pictures of Russian artists, or dairy products are Prostokvashino, named after Prostokvashino cartoon, animated in the Soviet time and loved by several generations of children. New episodes were produced several years ago to attract a new generation of fans. There is a divergent attitude towards tradition in different age groups, which should be considered when building brand communication. To sum up a little, the most typical characteristics of the social cultural profile of Russians are the following. They are ready to take their fate into their own hands, self-reliance, do not expect decisions from others, know how to find a way out of any situation, and support traditional values. The profile is quite homogeneous by age, except for young people. Regarding commitment to traditions, here young people have different cultural view. Knowing the cultural profile of consumers, you can localize global scenarios, as Oscar mentioned in his presentation, that values culture is one of the axes for 4 scenarios. Build more effective strategy, deliver relevant communication to consumers, and support healthy corporate culture. Concluding my speech, I would like to say a few words about new issue of FLAIR. All FLAIR articles are grouped into 3 sections: codes and values, personal ecosystem, and user guide. The report, a full report in English, is available and downloadable. Please welcome. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Katya. I'm sure lots of people are going to be keen to download and to learn more about Russia and the Russians. And I guess, yes, I think this resonates a lot of what you have said, because in the past we have already spoken about the importance of cultural intelligence and how more and more, and I think increasingly over the past few months, the local understanding and really being able to be grounded in local reality is so important for businesses. So I think that your perspective has brought a great, sort of point of view on that. And I must say, I particularly loved the heritage examples that you showed us. Examples always bring things to life very nicely. And so thanks for taking the time to look for those for us. And I guess a question for you, just to wrap up the session, would be, again, a piece of practical advice. I know there's people on this call that certainly will be dealing with Russia, working with Russians. What would be your advice to be successful in that?
Yeah, to be careful with the local brand communication and use all local specifics. It's very important to be relevant to the audience. And the second advice might be to leverage more initiatives and active position of Russians to drive business, to unlock more opportunities, and to develop and maintain healthy corporate culture in the organization.
Great. So use Russians to drive your business. That's in a nutshell. Great. Okay. Thanks so much, Katya, and thanks so much to all of the speakers and to all of the people that have been with us today. It's been, as usual, a great pleasure. We're looking forward to seeing you again in a month's time and to, going on this journey together in this new year, which is definitely full of challenges, but hopefully full of opportunities for all of us on this call and off the call. So have a lovely rest of the day wherever you are, and thank you very much once again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.